Well, hello, and welcome to the Fisher Poetry Podcast, a showcase of prose, poetry, and song written and performed by those in the commercial fishing community. Mostly. I'm your host, Brad. Thanks for joining us today. Today's episode is from the 2024 FisherPoets Gathering in Astoria, Oregon. The location and performers in this episode, as well as links to home pages of both the archive and gathering, are included in the episode description. So, without further ado, here's the show.
Hey, our last Fisher Poet for this set, and we've got a whole nother set coming up in the 9 o'clock hour, but our last Fisher Poet for this set is Jeffrey Kahrs. Jeffrey fished Alaska and Washington, commercial fisherman from 1980 to 1994 with a few years off here and there for bad behavior. He's the author of One Hook at a Time, a history of the Deep Sea Fishermen's Union of the Pacific. And so I'm going to let him tell you a little bit more about what he does. I don't want to delay it any further. Jeffrey, come on up here to the stage, pard.
Yeah, hi everybody. That was a great set, wasn't it? She's soulful, really soulful singing. You gotta love it. I wrote a book, One Hook at a Time, for the Deep Sea Fishermen's Union. You can get a copy at I always call it the Bait Shack, but I know that's wrong. Anyway, you can get it at the Shack then. And today I'm going to read. You know, when you start fishing, when I started fishing, it was not really very good. It was the early 1980s. Price was bad. Anyway, it made for some great stories. And I hope I don't offend anybody when I read this because, well, it's not all true, but a lot of it is, unfortunately. I lived through it. And this story is called The Bite. Okay, if you know what a bite is, it's like a loop of line that you get caught around your ankle, okay? When the line cinched up around my ankle, I didn't fear anything. But Hillbilly's eyes became as big as silver dollars. He whipped his knife out and wildly shoved it under the long line. I felt worse for him than myself as he was afraid and panicking for my benefit. I told him to be calm, in part because I couldn't process that I was just a firm tug away from going deep. But I'd also made a quick calculation. We were fishing in at least 350 fathoms of water, or around 2,100 feet. With a 25-fathom shot of buoy line thrown in, that meant about 2,250 feet of line. After dropping the anchor, we tossed most of our buoy line overboard when I found myself in the bite. I had a solution if the crew acted quickly, and in that quiet moment of waiting for life or death, I wonder how I found myself in this quandary. In 1980, there was nowhere for seasonal workers to camp in Petersburg, Alaska. Petersburg Fisheries Incorporated had expanded the processing plant without providing housing, so most of the summer workers lived in the muskeg, the swamp found in southeast Alaska's temperate rainforest. Living in it was fine once you learned to respect the environment, bring food back to camp, and feed the bears. Build a platform of pallet wood on the muskeg and keep dry. These simple rules were constantly broken, but most of the workers were just high school graduates or college kids looking to make a summer buck. Why should they know the best place to see the bears was the garbage dump? I was down to my last few bucks when I was offered a job fishing. Walking the dock one day, I met Dale. Dale knew my brother and offered me work on a very pretty 44-foot power trawler that was going out for halibut. I was just wasting my time in a swamp, waiting for the cold storage to open, so sure, why not? We were some kind of crew. His woman friend referred to herself as full-service cook, and it was true. When he wasn't changing oil, checking the electrical, or working on the auxiliary engine, they were rocking the mattress. Considering we were getting ready to make a trip, they weren't bothering to conserve energy. I guess it really wasn't much of a surprise. Then Dale hired a young guy who was famous for trying to rob a bank in Ketchikan when he was 16. Ketchikan's on an island, and he didn't have a plane ticket. We got along fine. When we were down in the hold putting halibut in bins and icing them, he wore the halibut gonads like a bikini. Quite a show. The opening was fantastic. The weather was sunny, I didn't get seasick, and I made $1,800. As we ran down Chatham Straits towards home, we tied to another boat and drank Japanese whiskey, which they had traded for Penthouse magazines. I became the richest man in the muskeg and could buy drinks for anyone. Then the cold storage opened and things got busy. I worked there a couple of weeks before they flew me out to pick up a seine boat in Craig. The skipper was a fine fisherman and an incredible screamer. Rather than open the end of his net to let a whale pass, he shot at it with his rifle. The whale put a hole in his net the size of a small town. We spent 2 days sewing that monster up. But it was another $2,000, and I went back to university with a few bucks, little knowing I'd caught the fishing bug. The next year, after graduating, I was back up in Petersburg. There in the harbor was a longline boat run by a hippie couple. My good friend Paul was a member of the crew. All the other longriders were already on their way to the grounds, but they were still in harbor because someone had put sugar in their diesel. The perp suspected that Paul, who had fished with him, had taken his Loran readings, which in those days were the key to the fishing grounds, as they located longitude and latitude. But it was good for me. Because they were delayed, I went out on the opening with them. And when one of their crew members took a hook to the big fleshy pad below the thumb, I was enlisted as crew. They gave me a half share, which came out to $400. Fishing was already going downhill financially. I waved to them as they headed out the harbor to Sitka. But then I discovered someone looking for a longline deckhand. My first impression was good. Despite missing a hand, Brad showed remarkable hand-eye coordination. He was incredible. He could really operate the roller. He was great. Yeah. He was from Heidelberg, a small Haida tribal town, and had a friend called Scoot, who, when not out on a trip, was evidently always grumpy. Brad went on and on about Scoot's whining. Out of nowhere, he'd say in a gravelly voice, "Where's my steak?" Those were poor times for Alaska longlining, and steak was hard to come by. The Magnuson Act, which created the 200-mile limit, had just gone into effect, but the stocks hadn't been rebuilt, and some were still being fished by foreign fleets. The Japanese were still on black cod, and they kept the price artificially low to keep fishermen from the United States out of the fishery. Prices were 40 cents per pound for large and 25 cents for small. It was the first and last time I ever went bait seining for herring. We picked up another crewman in Ketchikan. Hillbilly was mechanically adept and had some idea what he was doing, but it was all new to Logger. They were always rubbing each other the wrong way, and it was Logger who gave Drew the name Hillbilly. "Where'd you get that accent?" "Arkansas." "So you're a hillbilly?" "Fuck you. I'm from Fayetteville, home of the Razorbacks." "Much squealing going on there?" I looked over at Drew in a pleading, abject manner. "Please, sir, let's not get into a fight." Then I told Logger off. Get off his back, unless you want to be an engineer, not a job you could do. Logger actually turned out to be okay and told me some funny, if terrifying, stories about farm life in the dead of night as we baited. This was because he was as much a logger as Drew was a hillbilly. but nicknames are unfair. One ended up as a hillbilly and the other as a logger. We ran for Welker Seamount, which was 2 days away, and we bucked 5-foot waves the whole time. The Alice was a fine boat, but at just 50 feet, she was originally intended for fishing near the coast. If the weather blew up, she could always move inside. I was seasick the whole time. And because there was no money in the fishery, the skipper didn't have the cash to have a shipwright properly caulk where the beam of the bow stem and the planking met. The dowsing spray made for a miserable excursion of puking and getting salted down. The crewman in the bunk below me, hillbilly, wasn't happy when what little juice I had left in my stomach fell to the ground. He complained. I apologized and kept puking. Eventually, on wheel watch, I ate a piece of Sailor Boy pilot bread and then got a few hours sleep. When the boat slowed down, I staggered out on the deck to help set the gear. I could see the skipper was relieved that I could walk. Fishing was just plain bad. The Japanese had probably scraped the seamount clean. No one wanted a broker trip, but if it kept up, there was a chance we would technically be owing money. Still, if you didn't dwell on the money, it was quite entertaining. We listened to an endless loop of Jim Morrison's An American Prayer. Whenever Jim said, "In God we trust," our skipper would yell, "In God we trust." We were willing to trust in God, but our skipper's cooking, not so much. One time he served us a cling peach half with a dab of mayonnaise on lettuce. It wasn't but a few years back that lettuce was a big treat in Alaska. But for those of us coming up from down south, well, our unanimous rejection of the mayo and cling peach really hurt our skipper's feelings. Now we knew what "where's my steak" meant. I apologize for not getting back to you on the bite I found myself in, but as with so many fishing trips, nothing happens, and then so much happens, and then to write about it is to rely on memory, which is by nature flawed. Obviously, I'm still alive. I told Hillbilly to go up to the top house and tell the skipper to slow the boat down. The skipper did, and the line immediately became so loose it slipped off my ankle with a gentle tug. I was once again free to keep fishing for no financial reward. When our skipper finally admitted that the seamount was a waste of time, we headed back towards Ketchikan and decided to try Dixon Entrance. The fishing was a little better, but then, as the fog lifted, we realized the Canadian Coast Guard was watching us from 100 yards away. Whoops. We were on the wrong side of the border? Perhaps. All the out-of-season halibut fletches went overboard, though we kept the snapper fillets we'd been collecting to sell in Ketchikan to locals for $2 a pound. Snapper is a delicious fish, but in those days it was considered gertie bait. No better than fish to feed the fish. I made maybe $1,000 total that summer before my grandfather died, and I had to fly south for his funeral. I would come back to Alaska many times, but whether I made a small fortune or a dime, I had learned a valuable lesson. Don't get drunk and try to go home in the muskeg. You might wake up with water in your boots and a bear scratching your head. That's it. Thank you. Just one last little poem. I think a lot about the difference between being at sea and watching the sea. Most people's experience of the ocean is on a beach or something, this kind of oceanic effect, it's eternal and so forth. But when you're at sea, everything's moving all the time, right? And so it's it's such a different experience of what the sea means to you. And I wrote this about running. I was thinking about running, when you get in a boat, you run one place, you run another when you're fishing. You're on the move trying to catch them and things like this. So this is a poem called Running Song. And you have to imagine and remember that you're looking at your charts, or, now they have GPS, but you're checking the depth, and you can actually see the pinnacles in the water. It's a three-dimensional view of water, okay? And you have to imagine that as you're running, because part of it's just movement on a straight plane, or on a relatively straight plane, and the other side is this idea of depth. It's called Running Song. I will rid myself of these footsteps. Today, tomorrow, I become the other stride, inevitably strutting about something somewhere out there. I wish I understood plowed land, but see furrows and sway. I return to waves, foam on crests, pass between a channeled stone walls and the green weight of the forest, till open water splits the difference between kelp beds, plots my walk among the waking, pushes open doors. Islands spring up from the floor. Thank you.
Well, that's it. This one's in the tote. The Fisher Poetry Podcast is written and produced by Brad Wortman. The theme music for this episode is courtesy of Mark Allen Lovewell and Molly Knoll. If you'd like to appear on or have comments about the show, please send an email to thefisherpoetryarchive@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to haul the latest episodes into your net. The Fisher Poetry Podcast is available via our podcast host, Podbean, as well as Apple, YouTube, and Amazon. You can listen to our other podcast episodes, watch our YouTube videos, and join our community by going to thefisherpoetryarchive.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.
Come all young sailormen, listen to me. I'll sing you a song of the fish in the sea. Blow, ye winds, westerly, westerly blow. We're bound to the southward, so steady she goes.